throughout American history, there has always been notable scholars that dedicated their career to documenting the historical legacy of African American people. The list of notable historians includes such scholars as Frederick Douglass in his publication, My Bondage and My Freedom. Dr. Rayford Logan, What the Negro Wants, was a publication that documented the aspirations of African Americans for full citizenship. His publication, The Betrayal of the Negro. Dr. Charles Wesley, Negro Labor in the United States, 1850 to 1925. Our own professor and noted scholar, Dr. John Hope Franklin, From Slavery to Freedom, a publication which is continuing to be used in the classrooms of St. Augustine's University. Dr. Gina Ray McNeil, her publication, Groundwork, which documented the legacy of Charles Hamilton Houston. Today, Dr. Crystal Sanders is with us. Today, we are fortunate to have another notable historian who is documenting the legacy of African Americans. Dr. Crystal Sanders is currently an associate professor of history and African American studies at Pennsylvania State University. She is a historian of the 20th century United States. Dr. Sanders' research focus includes the study of civil rights history, the history of Black education, and Black women's history. A native of Clayton, North Carolina in Johnston County. How many Johnston County Falcons do we have? Let's give her a round of applause. Johnston County Falcons. Dr. Sanders received her bachelor's degree in history and public policy from Duke University and a PhD in history from Northwestern University. She is also an accomplished author, penning the award-winning book, A Chance for Change, Head Start and Mississippi's Black Freedom Struggle, a publication I am so glad to have and have enjoyed reading, which explored how working-class Black women in Mississippi transformed the Child Development Group of Mississippi, a federal Head Start program, into an opportunity to secure political and economic self-determination. Her articles on U.S. history have appeared in several peer-reviewed publications nationwide. Dr. Sanders is also serves as a consultant for and will be featured in a new documentary entitled, Tell Them We Are Rising, the story of Black colleges and universities, which will premiere on PBS in February of next year. And St. Augustine's will serve as a location where we will view that PBS special. Maybe we can get Dr. Sanders to come back and be with us at that time. After a selection from our very notable and admired and acclaimed college choir, who just returned, some of them just returned from Long Island, New York, where they performed this past weekend. Let's give our choir a round of applause for all of their work and for what they do under the leadership of Professor Kimberly Dunn. After the choir selection, the next voice that you will hear will be the renowned scholar and historian, Dr. Crystal Sanders. And as she comes to the podium, I know we're going to make this Duke Blue Devil know that before there was a Duke Blue, there was a St. Augustine's Blue. So we're going to let her know that she's truly in the promised land today. All right. Let us hear from our choir. Thank you all very much.
Walk together, children, don't you get weary. Walk together, children, don't you get weary. Walk together, children, don't you get weary. It's the great camp meeting in the promised land. Walk together, children, don't you get weary. Walk together, children, don't you get weary. Walk together, children, don't you get weary. It's the great camp meeting in the promised land. One of these mornings and you won't be Another Walk together, children, don't you get weary. Walk together, children, don't you get weary. Walk together, children, don't you get weary. It's the great camp meeting in the promised land. We're gonna walk, yes, we're gonna walk. We're gonna talk, yes, we're gonna talk. We're gonna shout, yes, we're gonna shout. We're gonna sing, yes, we're gonna sing. We're gonna walk, we're gonna talk. We're gonna shout, we're gonna sing. Walk, talk, talk, shout, sing, sing, hallelujah, Jesus our King. We're gonna walk, yes, we're gonna walk. We're gonna talk, yes, we're gonna talk. We're gonna shout, yes, we're gonna shout. We're gonna sing, yes, we're gonna sing. We're gonna walk, we're gonna talk. We're gonna shout, we're gonna sing. Walk, talk, talk, shout, sing, sing, hallelujah, Jesus our King. There's a great camp meeting.
As all of you know, St. Aug is an institution that has proclaimed that Black Lives Matter since 1867. For 150 years, St. Aug has been a place that has celebrated and cultivated Black excellence, and you all are continuing that tradition. I'm very thankful to your president, Dr. Ward, for the invitation to participate in this Lyceum series and for that very warm introduction. And I'm thankful to Ms. Bassnight for all of the logistical support that she has provided me over the last few weeks. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge my parents, Nathaniel and Beveline Sanders, who are in the audience today. So maybe you can just wave your hands. My father was born on this campus. At one time, St. Agnes Hospital was the biggest and best equipped hospital for African Americans between Washington, D.C. and New Orleans. My grandparents journeyed here to have their first child rather than endure the humiliation of giving birth in a segregated ward of a hospital closer to home. Those were trying times. I won't tell you the year out of respect for my father, but those were trying times. We are once again living in trying times. We have a president who is unashamed to deploy racist language and support racist policies in order to gain popularity. We have lawmakers who don't think twice about supporting legislation that disenfranchises people of color and denies people of health care. We are living in an age where we, I'm talking about Black people in particular, are castigated or even killed if we kneel, if we listen to loud music, if we stand on the corner minding our own business, or if we have the audacity to walk around wearing a hoodie. As troubling as these racial issues are, we also have some gendered issues that we must contend with. We know the names of Trayvon Martin, Jordan Davis, and Eric Garner, but we struggle to remember the names of Black females of anti-Black violence. What then shall we say in response to these things? As a historian, I often draw inspiration and encouragement from historical figures who overcame great odds. In the moment that we're living in today, one of the people who often crosses my mind is Dr. Anna Julia Cooper, who just so happens to be a St. Augustine's graduate. From the 1890s until the 1960s, Dr. Cooper boldly critiqued American society by raising awareness about the interlocking systems of race, gender, and class oppression. Dr. Cooper called out both white racism and Black sexism. I'm confident that we can benefit from Dr. Cooper's wisdom in this current age. To guide my remarks today, I want to focus on a few words that Dr. Cooper spoke in 1893 as she addressed the World Congress of Representative Women in Chicago. In a speech to a predominantly white audience, Dr. Cooper described the progress Black women had made since slavery. In an effort to stress the solidarity of humanity, Dr. Cooper said that race, color, sex, and condition are the accidents and not the substance of life. The accidents and not the substance of life. For my time with you today, I want to discuss what we can learn from Dr. Cooper's own lived experiences about focusing on the substance of life rather than the accidents of life. As many of you probably know, Anna Julia Cooper was born here in Raleigh in 1858 to an enslaved Black mother and a white slave master father. Dr. Cooper wrote that her mother was always too modest and shamefaced to mention him, meaning her father. In hindsight, we know that Cooper's mother had nothing to be ashamed of because slavery denied her control over her own body. Slavery also denied her of an education, although she could read the Bible and write a little, according to Anna Julia Cooper. After emancipation, Cooper's mother made sure that her daughter received an education. Anna Julia Cooper entered what was then called St. Augustine's Normal and Collegiate Institute in 1868. The school, located on this very site, had just opened its doors for instruction a few months earlier. The institution's mission was to educate freed slaves and train teachers and ministers for the South's Black population. It would be at St. Aug where Dr. Cooper first questioned a status quo that bothered her. You see, St. Aug admitted both men and women, but offered women students a special ladies course that was less academically challenging than the course offered to male students. Understanding that her sex was not the substance of life, she successfully petitioned administrators to take the courses reserved for men. We must put this in historical context. In the late 19th century, classical education, or instruction in things such as Greek or physics, were opportunities normally reserved for men, white men. Very few white women and even fewer Black men had access to college-level work. If things were tough for white women and for Black men, then they were doubly hard for Black women. By 1880, only 54 Black women had earned college degrees in the United States. Yet Cooper insisted that she had the intellectual acumen to take the most rigorous courses that St. Aug offered. Indeed, she took them and she excelled. Her unparalleled brilliance eventually led St. Aug administrators to have Cooper teach math to older children and adults here at the school. The love of learning and commitment to education as an avenue for advancement led Cooper to leave St. Aug in 1881 and matriculate at Oberlin College, since St. Aug was not yet offering bachelor's degrees. At Oberlin, Cooper was in a classroom with men and women whose parents had never been enslaved. However, she was not unnerved. She had been well trained here in Raleigh and earned her Bachelor of Arts degree at Oberlin in 1884. The degree was an accomplishment in itself, but I want to point out what was going on nationally while Cooper was at Oberlin. In 1882, white supremacists lynched 49 African Americans throughout the United States. Not one single perpetrator was ever arrested. In 1883, the United States Supreme Court said that the federal government could not keep businesses or individuals from discriminating against others on the basis of race. So this is how we begin to see legalized segregation in the late 19th century. In 1883, the court says, you can't keep a business from discriminating against someone on the basis of race. And finally, in 1884, the year that Cooper graduates from Oberlin, Ida B. Wells was forcibly removed from the ladies' car of a train simply because she was Black. At the very time that Cooper gets the degree that all of you are seeking, African Americans are losing hard-fought civil gains made during Reconstruction. Anti-Black violence, lynching, segregation, and disfranchisement became the norm in American society. Here is the lesson for us. Cooper understood that her race and sex were the accidents of life. They did not define her. Armed with a college degree, she set out to help other African Americans reach their highest potential. She taught at St. Aug and then later at Wilberforce in Ohio. Her actions are instructive for us today. We see widespread resegregation in our public schools. We see voting districts right here in North Carolina gerrymandered to give one political party an unfair advantage. We see law enforcement officials murder unarmed Black people routinely, and African Americans have to march and demonstrate just to get an investigation. In a nutshell, we are seeing new forms of lynching, disfranchisement, and segregation. Like Cooper, we have to arm ourselves academically. African Americans have a distinct relationship with education. Literacy denoted humanity. That was one of the main reasons why slave owners did not want enslaved people to learn to read and write. Reading is something that only humans can do. If we couldn't read, then we did not have to be afforded the rights and benefits of being human. Literacy was also the key to freedom itself. In order to read a map or to know what was happening with the abolition movement, one needed to know how to read. Our ancestors weren't stupid. They understood education's value, and after emancipation, the two things that formerly enslaved people did first was to legalize their marriages and establish schools. The priority that freed people placed on education was not lost on Anna Julia Cooper, and it shouldn't be lost on us today. I'm quite confident that everyone in this room understands the value of education. That's why we're sitting on a college campus right now. Take advantage of this opportunity. Get all the learning that you can get because it's something that no one can take away from you. Your race or sex is incidental, or accidental rather, but the knowledge that you acquire is purposeful. It is the substance of life. Cooper's commitment to education led her to move to Washington, D.C. in 1887 to teach at M Street High School, the first high school for African Americans in the country. In 1901, she became the principal of the school, and she literally put her economic livelihood on the line in order to offer Black students a first-rate education. You see, Cooper defied the white members of the D.C. Board of Education who wanted to teach vocational and industrial education at M Street. So white members of the board really want to prepare Black students at M Street for subservient roles. But Cooper sees things differently. Cooper offered classical subjects to students at M Street because she did not assume that Black students were destined to subordinate roles in American society. She actually refused to use the textbooks and curriculum that had been designated or assigned for M Street because she said that those materials insinuated Black people's alleged inferiority. So she goes toe-to-toe with the white DC Board of Education to say, I don't agree with the type of education that you're trying to offer Black students at M Street. Under Cooper's leadership, doing things her way, more and more students from M Street began being accepted at elite colleges such as Harvard and Yale. This accomplishment, however, was not celebrated. Cooper had dared to offer Black students something other than industrial education. She supposed that Black students could be doctors and lawyers and teachers rather than domestics and field hands. She had been warned not to upset the racial status quo, but she stayed true to herself and to her values. She knew that just because someone was Black or the descendant of slaves did not mean that he or she shouldn't have exposure to the most challenging academic subjects. Cooper used her position to bring about positive opportunities for others because the accidents of life did not define her, and she didn't want them to define others. There's a lesson in this story for all of us. One day you're going to leave these hallowed grounds of St. Aug. You're going to get jobs in corporate America or in the public sector. You're going to be sitting at conference tables where there might not be anyone else present who looks like you. What will you do while sitting at the table? Will you lift as you climb and advocate for those coming behind you? Will you sell your birthright for a mess of pottage? Or will you stay true to yourself, even if those choices are not popular? Cooper stayed true to herself by giving black students at M Street a classical education, and she was fired. She lost her job. We've seen Colin Kaepernick remain true to himself, and that has cost him the opportunity to play football while in the prime of his life. Muhammad Ali's political stances cost him the chance to fight during the prime years of a boxer's life. In Kaepernick's case, in Ali's case, and in Cooper's case, the substance of life necessitated that they take a stand. It necessitates that we do the same. In addition to making a name for herself in educational circles, Cooper was also active in several civic groups. Many of her community activities revolved around improving the status of black women because she saw black women's struggles as part of the larger black freedom struggle. How many of you in this room are familiar with black women's clubs? By show of hands. Anyone familiar with black women's clubs? Okay, I see a few hands. Many of you have probably heard of the Black Women's Club movement, but you might not be familiar with how it started. In 1895, there was a white man by the name of James Jack, and Jack was the president of the Missouri Press Association. And in 1895, Jack wrote a letter in which he said, and I quote, "The Negroes of this country are wholly devoid of morality, and the women are prostitutes, thieves, and liars," end quote. In a nutshell, Jack has essentially said there's no morality in the black race, and that black women in particular are thieves, liars, and prostitutes. His derogatory stereotype of African Americans mobilized black women nationwide. Black women from 14 states convened in Boston in 1895 to decide how to respond to Jack's attack on their character and their virtue. Anna Julia Cooper attended that 1895 meeting, which resulted in the founding of the National Association of Colored Women in 1896, right? So the roots of the Black Women's Club movement began in a response to a racist and sexist attack on black men and women. The National Association of Colored Women became an extensive network of black women nationwide. In my classes, I oftentimes tell my students that the NACW is the first civil rights organization in the country because it predates the NAACP by more than 10 years. The mission of black women's clubs was racial uplift with a special focus on the concerns of black women. Cooper had shown interest in examining the lives and experiences of black women before the club movement came into existence. In 1892, she wrote a book called A Voice from the South by a black woman from the South. The book analyzed the conditions of African Americans and black women and put forward the idea that being black and being female required a dual or intersectional focus. She argued that black women's subjection to interlocking forms of oppression gave them a unique perspective that was essential to improving the life of all American citizens. I mention this because advocating for black women's increased access to education, for their access to the ballot, and for their right to participate in dismantling white supremacy was Dr. Cooper's passion. We see this from a young age when she's petitions to be able to take courses that were reserved for men here at St. Aug, when she's traveling to Boston at great economic cost to take part in the founding of the Black Club Women's movement, we see that her passion is improving the status of Black women as a way of improving the status of the race as a whole. She knew that one's race or sex, accidents of life, should not limit one's potential or opportunities. To promote the cause of Black women's rights and abilities, Cooper went back to school at the age of 65, and she earned a doctorate or a PhD in history from the University of Paris at Sorbonne, becoming only the 4th Black woman in the United States to receive a doctorate degree. So imagine going back to school in your 60s, right? Not just going back to school, but going back to school in another country, writing a dissertation in another language. She's a native English speaker, but she writes her dissertation in French and does this at the age of 65 to show literally the world what Black people, but Black women in particular, are capable of. This was her passion, right? She sees herself as using her own life as a way to advance the race and advance the cause of Black women. Like Cooper, we have to figure out what we are passionate about. Cooper was passionate about ensuring that the voices of Black women were heard and that their opinions were included in larger conversations about racial advancement. Ask yourself, what is your passion? What is the substance of life that drives you? Perhaps it's music. If I could sing like you, that would be one of my passions. I would say, let me sing a song right now, but I don't have that gift. Perhaps it's sports. Perhaps it's faith. Whatever is your passion, you must figure it out and pursue it. My passion is African American history. More specifically, I aim to move beyond, to me, the tired trope of Black oppression and Black submission, to look at how African Americans have displayed resiliency and resistance throughout the 20th century in an effort to secure the rights and privileges of American citizenship. Researching, writing, and teaching Black history is a major part of my life's substance. For the remainder of my time with you today, I plan to share parts of my academic and professional journey with you to show you how I arrived at this passion. Dr. Ward mentioned that I'm from Johnston County. Is there anyone else in the room from Johnston County? Raise your hands high so that I can see you. Yay, Johnston County people, yay! Well, as he mentioned, I am from Clayton, North Carolina. Right now, in the corner of a garage in Clayton, North Carolina, in my parents' house, lie 2 crimson-colored bricks. Most people would dismiss these 2 bricks as being just ordinary pieces of clay, worthless remnants of some building from years ago. The bricks date back to the construction of the Johnston County Training School in 1922. The public school was the only educational facility for Black students in Smithfield, North Carolina. My grandmother, the one that I told you came here to St. Aug to have her first child, attended Johnston County Training School, and she loved every day that she spent within its walls. I know you all are probably wondering why I'm mentioning this, why I'm talking about some bricks, right? What could bricks possibly have to do with my passion for American history, and African American history in particular? During desegregation, the Johnston County Board of Education decided to shut down and demolish the Johnston County Training School. Determined to preserve a dear part of her past, my grandmother went to the site and took 2 bricks home. As the school is being destroyed, my grandmother literally gets off work, goes to the site of her alma mater, and takes 2 bricks with her to her house. I'll never forget the day that my grandmother gave me the bricks. She looked me in the eye and she told me, Crystal, people can take anything they want to take away from you, but the one thing no one can take away from you is what you know. No one can ever take what you put in your head. So fast forward to my freshman year of college, my very first semester of college. I took a history class, and in this class, it became apparent to me quite quickly that my classmates understood the history of black education very differently than I did, because I had gotten my stories from my grandmother, who talked about being at Johnson County Training School with teachers and administrators who loved her, who affirmed her, and who helped her to reach her highest potential. But when I was sitting in class, my classmates were saying, everything about black schools prior to Brown was horrible. There were bad facilities, used textbooks. Essentially I said, well, this really doesn't line up with what I've been told. This is completely opposite to what my grandmother had told me. And I decided right then, freshman year, first semester, that I wanted to try to reconcile these different accounts of black schools prior to Brown, prior to the Supreme Court decision outlawing segregation in public education. So my interest in the history of black education led me to write an honors thesis during my senior year of college. In this thesis, I decided to compare 3 different types of black schools prior to the Brown decision. So 3 types of black schools prior to the 1954 decision outlawing segregation in public education. And actually, one of the schools I used is a school right here in Raleigh, St. Monica's Catholic School, which was a black Catholic school literally down the street. I looked at the faculty, curriculum, and community support of these 3 different types of schools prior to Brown. I enjoyed having the opportunity to do independent research and to write about something that interests me. As college students, sometimes your professors tell you what you have to write about, but by writing a thesis, I got to choose my own topic, and I knew I wanted to write about these black schools because my grandmother had given me these bricks. By this point, my grandmother was deceased, but her love for her school stayed with me, and I wanted to try to figure out how she could have this love for this school, but yet the textbooks say something completely different about the type of institution that she attended. And I enjoyed writing this thesis so much that I decided that I wanted to go to graduate school and get a PhD in history. And let me stop right here and say that we need more students of color to pursue doctorate degrees. Whether you want to get a PhD in history, English, education, chemistry, biology, it's a field you should really consider. If you want the opportunity to do research, if you want the opportunity to teach, please, please, please consider going to graduate school and pursuing a doctorate. Matter of fact, if you're interested in pursuing a doctorate in history, please see me after this program, because I run a free summer program, completely free summer program, for students of color who are undergraduates who have an interest in pursuing a PhD in history. So it's a free 1-week summer program. We pay for your flight, your hotel, your meals, everything. You fly to Penn State, you spend a week with me, and we go through all the nuts and bolts about what does it mean to be a historian, how do I apply to graduate school, how do I make sure that I go to graduate school completely free without any debt. These are the types of things that we cover. So I brought the brochures with me for my summer program. I'll tell you, I've had students from Shaw, I've had students from Central, but I have not yet had a student from St. Aug in my summer program. So please, please, please see me afterwards if you are at all interested in pursuing a PhD in history. But okay, back to the story. I was talking about bricks, talking about writing an honors thesis at Duke on black education, and I decided to apply to graduate school. I applied to graduate school being determined that being black, being a woman, and being from a rural area would not hinder me. These were the accidents of life, right? Besides, if your fellow Falcon, Dr. Anna Julia Cooper, could get a PhD in 1925 writing a thesis in another language, then certainly I should be able to do it in the 21st century, given that I have the internet, access to plenty of libraries, and adequate financial support at my disposal. I applied to 3 graduate schools, and I did not get into my top choice. I tell you that today because I'm a firm believer that all things work out for our good. I ended up going to Northwestern University, and I had all of the support there that I needed to do well. So in the beginning, it looked like a problem, right? It looked like, oh, I don't get to go where I want to go. But it all worked out. The Lord worked it out, that He knew where I needed to go, and He closed the other doors to make sure I ended up where I needed to be. So while at Northwestern, I wrote my master's thesis on black college student activism in the 1930s. I was really looking at activism at Howard University in the 1930s. The leader of Howard protests in the 1930s was Kenneth Clark, someone who becomes really famous with the 1954 Brown decision because of the doll experiment. But what's interesting about Clark is that he was leading so many protests that the president of Howard, Mordecai Johnson, wants to expel him. So he almost doesn't graduate. But it's Ralph Bunche who comes to his aid and tells Mordecai Johnson, this is what we're preparing students for, right? They're in college to learn how to create the world in which they want to live. So we can't kick him out for doing what we're teaching him or equipping him to do. So anyway, I mentioned this because I thought this was my master's topic and this is what I was going to continue to work on for my dissertation. But while in the archive, I came across a speech by a senator from the state of Mississippi, and this was a speech that he makes on the Senate floor in 1965, and he is literally railing against Head Start. He's saying that Head Start is a front for communism, that it's a front for beatniks, and there's all of this immoral stuff going on. And I remember sitting at my computer and saying, you know, what could be so bad about Head Start? Isn't it cookies and crayons and coloring? I couldn't think that there could be anything at all malicious about a Head Start program. So my curiosity was piqued, and I decided to do more research. And I found out that this senator had a problem with one particular Head Start program. And it was a program in Mississippi run by working class black women. And the reason he had a problem was that these black women had figured out how to use preschool education to continue that state's long freedom struggle, right? So women like Fannie Lou Hamer, women like Unita Blackwell, these were women who figured out that, you know, education is a central part of the freedom struggle. And in trying to register to vote and trying to secure good jobs, they needed to make sure that children coming up in younger generations had the skills they needed to do well. And that started with a firm foundation in early childhood education. And so because they were giving students those opportunities and doing it in a way that was really an Afrocentric curriculum, they provoked the opposition of white supremacists in that state. So as Dr. Ward said, I wrote a book on Head Start in Mississippi as a way of looking at how this program was connected to the much longer civil rights movement in that state. I mention this because all of this relates to my interest in black education, right? All of this from the interest of getting these bricks, of writing the thesis, of then writing the master's thesis, and then the dissertation. This became my passion. This became what I wanted to do, which was to tell the story of African Americans' long quest for quality education at all levels. Now, in addition to the book, I've written several articles about the ways in which African Americans, like Dr. Anna Julia Cooper, have worked to dismantle white supremacy. I've written on everything from the KKK in Eastern North Carolina to the political work of Bennett College students in the 1930s and 1960s. My academic and professional journey have taught me that everyone is not going to like my work. Everyone is not going to want my work published. You all see the book, but you might not see the rejections that come from publishers, right? When I experience these kinds of setbacks or hiccups, I draw on the strength of others. Remember, Dr. Cooper received hostility rather than praise when she offered her students college preparation rather than vocational training. On your journey, you will have to contend with those who want to focus on the accidents of your life rather than on your substance, on your character, on your intellect, and on your drive. The real power in these situations is how you respond. Like your fellow Falcon, Dr. Anna Julia Cooper, who came before you, you can discover your passion and let none of the accidents of life keep you from pursuing it. All of you are part of a rich history of St. Augustine's graduates who have discovered the purpose for their existence, their substance. If you haven't yet figured out what drives you, don't fret, don't worry about it. Just be open to life's twists and turns and resolve never to allow race or sex or condition or any other accident to stymie your dreams. Thank you.
You're watching the WAUG Network.